Won't you leave them just a little bit of room to swim? Pray for the fish.
Before you ever get into considering anything about punching holes in fish, what you need to do is make sure your live well parameters are where they should be. That means the temperature's right and the oxygen content is good. You've got to make sure this is maintained throughout the day. I've never been a big fan of filling my live wells, putting treatment in it, and leaving that water in there all day for the simple reason that the fish excrete waste all day, and there's only a limited amount of water in there. You should either be replacing that water periodically throughout the day and putting more treatment in if you want to. I have nothing against treatment, but if there's enough oxygen in the water that the fish came out of and they're surviving fine, there should be enough oxygen in the water when it's in your live well, unless it's warming up, because warm water holds a lot less oxygen. But that being said, you can manage that with a little ice to keep the temperature down. You don't want to change it too many degrees, but that's just two of the live well things you really have to have in place before you consider poking holes in a fish. If you don't have them in place, you're really jumping from like A to Z, and that's just not the way you want to take care of these fish. Smallmouth especially are more sensitive to this stuff. If the way I manage my live wells personally, everyone has their own little formula. I have the live well pumps on all day, set on periodic, and I also have the recircs on at the same time. So every time they click on, they fill in fresh water, the overflow goes out, which is fine, and it's aerating. And I run them like that all day. Yeah, your batteries have to be in good shape, but you shouldn't be out on the water if your batteries aren't in good shape. So that's basically just what that says. Unless you can remind yourself to refill during the day, I just keep both those pumps turned on. It's really one of the better ways to manage fish. Now, for those of you that don't understand what happens to a fish's swim bladder when it comes to the surface, I put a little chart here together. 1 cubic foot of water, just figure a box, it's 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot. Fill it with water. It contains 7.48 roughly gallons of water in that cubic foot. 1 gallon of water weighs 8.34 pounds. So you've got a whole bunch of weight. If that fish comes off the bottom, say it's in 8 foot of water, each one of those little blocks weighs 61.75 pounds. That's how much a cubic foot of water weighs. That fish is only in 8 feet of water. It has 494 pounds of pressure exerted on its little body. The same as you would be if you dove down there. You know how your eardrums change when you dive in the water? Well, this fish's swim bladder has gas in it. Gases are very compressible. You guys that know anything about hydraulics, you know that hydraulics work because fluids are not compressible. All right? You have pressure change and it activates an arm. That's how hydraulics work. You can't compress fluids. But what does compress really easily is gas. Oxygen, nitrogen, doesn't matter what it is. The fish actually has oxygen in its swim bladder, and that gets compressed by the weight of almost 500 pounds of water when it's down there. The fish's body doesn't compress, just like your body doesn't compress when you go down low in the water. But the fish's swim bladder, which is full of gas, which is very compressible, just goes down. So when that fish is in, say, 8 foot of water, it's got 500 pounds of pressure on it. You bring, say you're angling that fish, yeah, it's only in 8 feet of water. You bring it up, it's now lost 500 pounds of pressure that's been pushing on that swim bladder. You're at the surface. Okay, so it no longer has that weight on it. So what does that swim bladder do? It just goes whoop. It's like somebody sticking a balloon inside your peritoneal cavity and blowing it up. And all of a sudden, you've got all this pressure, you can't hardly breathe, your heart's compressed, it can't pump blood. That's what happens to these fish. Unfortunately, the smallmouths are very much more susceptible to it than largemouth. Let's see. Well, I just went over all that. Understanding pressure. So there's your water. There's a little balloon. That's the fish's swim bladder. when you take this, take that little balloon and bring it up. You can do this sometime with a balloon. Just blow it up at the surface. Dive, get your kids to do it. Dive down and see how much that balloon shrinks. You will be amazed. When you bring that balloon up, even from, if they're not all the way out of the water, that's, if it happens suddenly, that swim bladder is still expanding, going down, expanding. It will just get really huge. I don't know exactly how much a certain volume will expand to. I didn't look that far into it. It's just enough to know that it expands. This is just a little, so there's that fish with that swim bladder down there. See that pretty small mouth? Isn't that nice? You have no idea how long it took me to get that little balloon in there.
As long as it took me to get that small one.
Now you bring that fish up, look at that. That swim bladder just expands and pushes all the organs, internal organs out of place. It bruises the surface of the organs. So this damage is real. It's been documented, researched. A lot of people up in Canada have done work on this. That's actually in my Fizz kits. The smallmouth, the pretty colored version of that is done, was put together by a fizzing study done by Stephen Cook. He gave me permission to use it. So, one of the biggest things to do is know the signs of barotrauma. When your fish is hanging on top of the water, it can be flat, it can be hanging there, it can be totally upside down. Anyone that's seen some of the video coverage of the bass tournaments, if you've ever seen KVD's live well, his are always upside down. I don't know why, but that man doesn't fizz his fish. I don't know. But anyways, there, yeah, he doesn't. I'll tell you, because I fizzed his fish up at Waddington.
There we go.
Yeah, too late, too late. Let's see. When you find your fish like this, the time to do something about it is right then, right now. It doesn't matter what you do. I don't care if you use fin clips, if you don't want to stick a fish, but you need to do something. I would rather, that's why I teach people how to do this. It's a simple technique, it's easy, it doesn't hurt the fish. It actually makes them rest the whole rest of the day in your live well quietly. You won't hear them thumping and hitting against live well lids because they're uncomfortable. They're trying to get rid of the pain. They don't know what's happened. They can't deal with it any other way except trying to get away. Yeah, you can let the fish go. You can use the fin clips, or you can fizz it. It's a weight that has a little alligator clip. You clip it. Let me see. Oh, can I go back? Yeah.
I have some I can bring to the next meeting.
Yeah.
I
You
have-
clip it right on the anal fin. That's the anal fin there. It's a weight that helps counteract the buoyancy of the fish, and it just keeps the fish upright. Part of the reason these fish suffer so much when they are experiencing the barotrauma is because they struggle all day to get themselves upright. The fish knows it's not oriented correctly in the water, so they thrash and struggle and thrash and struggle, and what they do is exhaust themselves. So at the end of the day, when we get them at the weigh-in, they are so tired they can't overcome their buoyancy to get like 2 feet down in the water. Once they're 2 feet down, that swim bladder starts compressing and they can swim the rest of the way. But if you just let them loose at the end of the weigh-in and you dump them and they're floating, they're never going to get down to where they need to be. They will die there, seagull will get them, whatever. They will just hang there and die. That's why this is really, really important. We keep catching bigger ones and bigger ones and bigger ones. So we're selecting the best fish out of what we catch every day. And these are the fish that we need to get back into the population because they're the ones that have gotten the biggest. They're the ones that have genetically feed more, breed more, produce more eggs. And if we don't take care of them, we're just Xing off that top part of the population with the genetics that we want. We want these fish to go back and be viable. For years and years, Bass has done a great job about promoting tournament, catch and release, sustainability, and that's great. We talk about releasing fish that are alive. Well, you've all seen them, we've all had them. You've got one fish that you have in your bag that's just one fin wave away from being dead. Yeah, sure, technically he's alive. You look at his gills, they're pink, his eyes are orange. That fish is gonna be dead in an hour, no matter if he gets turned back in the regular water or not. So what we want to do is we want to aim for better than that. We want to up our standards. We want to aim to release a viable fish. A viable fish is one that goes on to eat, grow, and reproduce. That means it puts back into the population more babies at the end of all this. That's our goal anymore now. That's what I'd like to think it is. I'm working on language. Hopefully we can get that, give the tournament managers something to go on, like pink gills and orange eyes, that's a dead fish. And that needs to be carried through with the dead fish penalties. People say, oh no, it's live. Yeah, it's alive, but it's not gonna be. So that's, I think we need to hold ourselves to a higher standard. That's just my opinion. Okay, here's one of the urban legends of fizzing. My fish can't possibly need fizzing, I only caught it in 5 feet of water. Well, I just explained to you why that is bull. I'm not looking at anybody, Fred, but.
I can look at Brad every day.
Everyone says, oh no, it doesn't need fizzing, I caught it in 3 feet wide. But you don't know if that fish just came out 30. That fish could just be up there cruising. As long as it's not above at the water surface, that swim bladder is still compressed to the point where that fish can still function. Let's see. Oh, some people think that the fish will be all right, it will burp off the excess gas. There is no external opening between that swim bladder and the outside world. If you squeeze it, nothing's going to happen except you're going to hurt the fish. It cannot burp off this extra pressure. Let's see. The gas is secreted into and absorbed back out of the swim bladder by a little gland called the reet mirror ball. And it's a complex process. pH, blood pH, all is dependent on how it can put the gas in, take the gas out. But one of the things, we all know we used to fizz through the mouth. A lot of people still do, through the gullet. What that little reet mirror ball sits right on the front of the swim bladder. And I think I have a picture here. Okay, that reet mirror ball is, see where the swim bladder is, that big white thumb looking thing? The gland that controls that swim bladder is way up on the front. And I think I have another picture. All right, when that swim bladder inflates, see how nice and small it is there? See those red arrows going down at an angle? That swim bladder blows up and pushes all those organs towards the front of the fish. They can't go around the swim bladder because there's a peritoneal lining that keeps all those organs like tied up together. But it pushes them all towards the front of the fish. That red arrow coming in from the left is the approximate location of where you're going to fizz a fish if you do it through the mouth. And when all those organs are just plugged up against the front, the first thing you do is hit something substantial. It can be a major artery, it can be the heart, and it can be the reet mirror ball. You can actually damage that gland depending on where you put that needle. It's like, you know, playing darts. You don't know what you're going to hit. But if you hit that reet mirror ball and damage that, that fish will go back into the water. Yeah, he won't float at the surface now, but he's not going to be able to control his buoyancy anymore. So you've damaged that fish. Do you have any way of knowing that at a tournament? Of course not. You know, we don't really know what the post-tournament mortalities, the delayed mortalities are in some of these fish. I've seen some estimates that are pretty high. It scares me. That's why we have to do the best job we can. Okay, here's your pretty smallmouth, thanks to Stephen Cook. That's supposed to be in there somewhere. Yep. Everyone says count 3 scales back from the pectoral fin. No, you have landmarks, and the reason you use landmarks is because every fish is proportioned a little different. You've seen the longer smallmouth, you've seen the short chubby ones. This, if you count back to the 4th dorsal spine, make a line that goes down to the anal pore, and then come off straight off that pectoral fin. Where those 2 lines intersect, no matter where it is on that fish, that's where you want to pierce them. If you lay it on your deck, you'll see that that bulge will be approximately at that point. And if you hit that fish there with a needle, 99 times out of 100, there's always the odd one, they're all different, just like you and me, 99 times out of 100, you will get gas. And you'll see on the largemouth, you go between the notch of the spiny fin and the soft rayed fin. You go down to the anal pore, but you see, excuse me, how much farther back that is. And you still draw the same line off the anal fin, or off the pectoral fin. But it's gonna be a lot further back on the largemouth. It'll be further back on a long, skinny river smallmouth too, so that's why you use the landmarks. It takes into account the differences between the fish. Here's swarm myths. Oh, we've already gone over that one. Really, the only way you can determine if a fish does or doesn't need fishing is by looking at it and evaluating it. When I catch a fish, I put them in a live well. I mean, if you catch them 30 feet, you're probably going to be, for sure, fizzing him. Doing something to relieve his barotrauma, because they're going to be floating upside down, almost bouncing out of the water. But I usually give my fish a few minutes in the live well to get accustomed to it, and then I check it. The first 10 minutes that I have a fish, I'm back and forth to live well a couple times. It's not a big deal. But if you want your fish to live, this is what you have to do. And every time you catch a fish, you give it that few minutes to, sometimes, if they're belly up when you put them in the live well, just take them out and fizz them. I mean, they're gonna rest quietly in there, they're not gonna struggle, they're not gonna get hypoxic. It's just really better for these smallmouth. Largemouth seem to get through this a little better. They're not as sensitive to it. Maybe they've got more room because they've got a longer body. The smallmouth are kind of tight and compact. I don't know what the difference is, but I do know that when a smallmouth is stressed, its blood pH changes. That reet mirabal, its ability to put gas in and take gas out of that swim bladder is determined by blood pH. So when a smallmouth is stressed, its blood pH goes down, it gets acidotic, it can't manage its own swim bladder. That's why we have to step in and do something for these fish. It's really critical. Oh. I've caught fish in 2 or 3 feet of water, 4 feet of water, thrown them in the live well, looked at them, not even thinking they'd need it, and there they are, belly up. It's like I said, you don't know if that fish has come up out of 30 water to cruise the flats for a few minutes and get something to eat. You just need to evaluate these fish throughout the day. Every time you go to the live well, every time you check on your fish, just look at them, see what they're doing. If they're all down there and they're all happy in the bottom of your live well, you're doing the right thing, whatever it is that you're doing. I've had people tell me, you can't fizz a largemouth, it'll kill them. No, I've caught big largemouth in Cayuga. I fish too. I caught big largemouth in Cayuga in 20 feet of water on a little tiny tube that had come up and needed fizzing immediately. I don't wait for these fish to do it themselves. The damage that's caused inside the body, the bruising and everything is really, it all happens right away. It doesn't happen slowly. This damage is done right away. So, I don't want to talk at you, but I'd be happy to answer any questions right now. And I also want to remind everyone to be a good steward out on the water. Picture that snake, it doesn't do it justice there. That snake was 5 feet long, huge, beautiful water snake. It got its head stuck in a Coors Light. Don't do that. Keep your cans, keep your trash in your boat and get rid of it. Keep your dead baits, either throw them in the trash so they get properly disposed of, or give them to me or something, but keep track of your fishing line. I've seen down on, what lake was that? We saw that bird hanging off. It was a beautiful egret of some kind. It had lost all its feathers. It was wadded up with its legs, hanging off of a branch in a tree, just hanging there, all dead and dry and disgusting. Keep track of your stuff, I keep a little shopping bag just wadded up in the corner of my first compartment, and I throw trash in there, and I just take it out with me and throw it away. When you get home, it's one of the things you want to do. So, anyways, I have fizz kits here. I'll answer any questions you guys want right now. Yeah.
When you come back to that fourth spine, and you come down, and you find your spot,
Yep.
real simple. Is the needle going in parallel to the body, or is it going in,
It
how
is
do you
going,
insert the needle?
okay, once you get your spot, okay, you've got your fish here, the needle comes in at like a 45-degree angle, because you have to go under a scale. You have to use the point of that needle, get under a scale, kind of widget your way under a scale. So you have to go in at an angle like this. You just barely pierce the skin. Shouldn't go in more than 1/4 of an inch maybe. You put that needle straight up and down, and you plunge it in, right down to the hub. And then the thing that my needle has that most other needles don't have is the reamer. This is critical. Have you guys seen the videos online? Do you want You don't count to 10, you don't count to 7, you don't count to 5. You hold that fish in the water, and I kind of make they're usually pretty just laying there by the time you get to fizzing them. They don't have a lot of energy at the end of the day like this. Fresher fish will give you a little more of a struggle. But you just kind of cradle them in your hands after you get the needle all placed. You push that needle in, go straight down to the fish, you tap that reamer to make sure it clears any tissue that gets picked up on the end of the needle. Because 9 times out of 10, people are in the right place, but if they have no reamer to clear that tissue out of there, you oftentimes pick up the tissue. You're going through muscle. It's not, unheard of. So you tap that reamer, pull the reamer out, and he's bubbling. So you just kind of cradle that fish in your arms. He's bouncing up against my hands like this the whole time. Once he stops bouncing against my hands and he's just kind of hanging in the water, you just pull the needle right out. Because he is now neutrally buoyant. And you'll see when you pull that needle out and take your hands out from around him, they're stunned, they're exhausted, they kind of sink a little bit, and then all of a sudden you'll see him right up and swim around. And they'll just sit there. They're just so tired. These fish are exhausted.
Well, you mentioned earlier in your presentation about your live wells with the water being pumped into them.
Yeah.
What about the newer boats that have the oxygenated?
You can have oxygen in there, but keep in mind that fish has gills. They're very vascular. They absorb anything that is in the water, good, bad, or indifferent, which means salt, anything else you put in there, and waste material. They're constantly excreting urea, nitrogenous wastes into the water. So if you fill your live well with 25 gallons of water, or whatever it is, 15, and you don't exchange that water all day, that fish is virtually swimming in a cesspool by the end of the day. They don't always poop like we do. It's not always material. Most of the times it is, but they excrete a lot of urea too, nitrogenous waste from the things that they eat. So if you're not putting fresh water into your live well, you're doing your fish a disservice. And I have nothing against treatments. I think they're fine. I just don't personally use them. Treatments have a real place when you're trailered weigh in and you go to take that fish out and it's in your live well. It's got to sit there for 45 minutes because they have salt in them. It kind of calms the fish down. And that's a place you want to start using according to directions. Who reads label directions here? Anybody?
What's true?
According to label directions, just because some's good doesn't mean more is better. Keep that in mind. That's why they put that blue dye in it, so you can see that the water's treated, because if you just put what they had in there without the blue dye doesn't really do anything except let you know that water's treated. Just keep in mind, if that fish is just fine out in the lake water, unless you're catching smallmouth and you go into Chippewa Bay in the muddy water and it's warm, you want to put your live wells on recirc well you're in there if you got a boat full of smallmouth. That's common sense stuff like that. I can't reiterate. Yeah.
Do you have a recommendation on what to clean your live well with or not to clean it?
Yeah. You can use a dilute bleach solution. I do believe on the DEC website, I used to have it on here, I don't anymore. There's a recommendation for, I don't know if it's 1 part Clorox to 10 parts water,
Yeah.
but I think that's pretty good. You just want to make sure, you can leave it soak and recirculate in there for a while, it doesn't matter. And then just drain it out, and I would rinse it with fresh water just to make sure there's no chlorine. And that's another thing too, if you guys are buying ice anywhere, make sure it's not chlorinated, or you might need the live well additive to take the chlorine out. But we have well water. I don't like buying bags of ice. We freeze water in leftover soda cans, or what do we use? Gatorade bottles. They're tougher. We freeze a whole bunch of them. We always have them on hand, and just throw them in a cooler, or put them in your loose ice, your crushed ice in your cooler that's on the boat to keep it frozen all day till you need it at trailer time or if it's a hot day. And what that does is you can take that thing, and take them out when you run, because it's like a club, it'll beat your fish to death too. It slowly melts, it doesn't instantly drop the temperature, 15 degrees. You dump a whole bag of ice in those live wells, and that's such a drastic change, that puts just one more stress on the fish. So, in a perfect world, we're doing temperature changes slowly, and you can have these jugs in there, and it'll just keep that temperature from creeping up consistently throughout the afternoon. When it melts, it just goes out of the little jug, and you've got an empty jug, and then you put the next one in to keep
So
it
you do it
down.
with the top off, not top on?
Yeah, you can leave the top on if you want to. It doesn't matter. If you've got frozen water and it's got chlorine in it, you maybe best leave the top on. That's common sense stuff too. But that's one way you can manage the temperature of live wells without doing drastic changes. Because you put that bag of ice in that live well, you know how quick it melts? And in 15 minutes, you've got nothing. You'll be right back up to the 85-degree temperatures you're trying to avoid. So that's just kind of common sense. Yeah.
Question about the anal fin weights. From what you said tonight, ideally you want to fizz the fish as soon as possible because the pressure can damage the fish.
That's right.
So does that mean anal weighting them and not fizzing them? You're basically maybe making them last for the weigh-in, but you're really not doing the fish any favor
Well,
as far as damage?
there's various degrees of the barotrauma. Not all fish are going to suffer from it and get mortality, but a good deal of them are. And we're not going to see it because it's going to happen after the fish is released from the tournament. If you have a fish that every time you open the live well, he's on his side and then he scoots back down to the bottom, but every time you open that live well, he's hanging right there, that's a good candidate for an anal fin clip. Because he's almost managing on his own, but not quite. So that's the kind of fish that if you don't want to stick holes in them, fine, put the anal clip on that fish. He's marginal. Because if they're swimming back down, every time you open that live well, that means when you're not looking at them, where are they? Hanging on the surface, struggling, Even if they're not struggling and thrashing around, they're still hanging there and they're unhappy, they're sideways. A sideways fish is never happy. It's stressed and it just uses up all its resources. At the end of the day, you see a lot of these fish, they can't even swim. They're still alive, but they can't even get up a tail wag enough to drive themselves back down in the water. So, yeah.
What's the anal clip? Is that you guys clipping the fin or you putting a
No,
weight on
it's
it?
an alligator
Okay,
clip
okay,
that
okay.
gets, you put it on there.
Clipping the fin, I didn't see what that purpose was.
And it's got various weights on
All
it.
right.
And if you're an ice fisherman,
fisherman,
it's
yeah.
basically the same weight you use to
Check
figure
the
out the
depth.
distance
Right,
and depth
right.
and
Yeah.
Okay.
same thing
And,
bigger.
and it's okay. I'd rather do something that I know that fish is responding to right then. That's just my preference. Some people get all skeeved out about needles after you do one or two fish. I don't know if anybody saw the video with John Cruz. Yeah, he did 10 of them. He did 10 of them right there with me. He was an expert inside of 2 fish. I mean, really. The technique is not hard. Where people went wrong was they'd have a needle, they'd just go to the TSC and buy a needle, and it wouldn't have a reamer in it. Well, the first thing you do, you stick that fish, push the needle, you follow all the landmarks, crap, there's no bubbles coming out. You pull it out, you stick that fish again, crap, there's no bubbles coming out. And the fish ends up being a pincushion. So what I did was make that reamer, and that was something that, I just make it out of for 18 gauge needle is what I use in my kits, and a number 10 gauge stainless steel wire fits in there, and I just bend them so they have a little handle on them and cut them just long enough so when that's all the way down in there, it just clears the tip of the needle by just a bit. Most of the commercially available fizzing needles are huge. They're like 14 or 16 gauge. Well, I've seen people fizz fish with that, and I've seen them swim away losing bubbles out their side. Well, that kind of defeats the whole purpose. So that's why I made the smallest needle I could really physically use to do this. Smaller hole, goes up, yields up, of course, yeah.
You bring that balloon down. So why then when we release the fish and they go back down deep and they have all that weight back on them again, does that not strangle them then?
No, it won't strangle them. Once they get back in their normal habitat and they're content, they get over the stress we put on them, they start managing their own swim bladder again. You can take too much air out. If you don't pay attention to how buoyant that fish is, you know, you can take too much air out. They will sink like a freaking rock
Now,
and
that's what
sit
you were
there.
talking about when the fish was bouncing your hand. when
That's
you-
right. Yeah. You can kind of, I mean, you don't even have to have your hands around it. I have to hang on to it. I don't want to take it off with my needle and losing it in the live well or bending it or whatever. You can just kind of watch that fish, and when he's, say this is the surface of the water, and he's right up there bouncing. All right, now he's losing some air out of his swim bladder. Now he's not bouncing so much, and now all of a sudden he's right there, but he's not sinking. You just yank that needle right out. You could fizz a fish again if you didn't take enough out, but as long as you get rid of the most of it, and he's almost good, he'll probably be okay. If you think you haven't taken enough out, have the anal weights, clip it on there, and he's good the rest of the day. You know, so, yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with this, but do you have any opinion on using Mountain Dew down?
I've used a lemon lime soda if somehow the gills got nicked or hooked or something and they're bleeding. But what I would encourage you to do is not just slosh it down the whole gullet. Find the area that's bleeding and try to, you know, keep it there, because that citric acid will also harm the gills.
Right, yeah, I mean, I've done that before, I was just curious.
Yeah.
in terms
No,
of
I've
water
used it.
damage.
Yeah, if it's a good fish and it's bleeding, I don't want the blood all in the live well either. You know, I've used that to save a good fish, and if it's really bad and the fish isn't so good, I throw him out while he's still alive, because once he gets down there, he'll stop bleeding on his own. But thrashing around in the live well with his mouth open and fighting, you know, he'll never quit bleeding there. So, but I have used that too, and it's a legitimate thing. I don't know if all sodas work. A lot of that treatment has the basic active ingredient in it is salt. Salt makes the fish's slime coat come back a little quicker, and it's a sedation thing. It kind of makes them groggy. So if they're groggy and they're slow, their metabolic rate is down, and they're not using up the oxygen in their tissues. So it kind of just slows them down. It's like taking a Xanax or something. Just kind of sedates them, and yeah, it just
It stops them from doing necessarily what they have to do to.
yeah, they won't struggle anymore. They'll lay there, they'll still float at the surface, but they won't be struggling, which is okay, but it's not a fix to it. So filled with smallies that you would give your right arm to have, and your left leg probably too, to have in a tournament. I mean, it's always the big ones. 99% of them, it's the big ones that die. You know, and talk about one more thing, it's not fizzing. I've seen lately, and I'm gonna use it this year, one of the biggest damaging things to fish, whether they need fizzing or not, is the washing machine effect. If you don't stop in the long run, fill your live wells, I hope you all do, to check your live wells. Stop and see how much water's in there, because if that water starts to get down there and get low, those fish are just getting sloshed around like they're in a washing machine. They get bruised, battered, they're beaten by the time they end up at the end of the tournament with me. So I've seen people, one guy cut a piece of stiff foam and he puts it just a little smaller than the live well top, you know, the actual dimensions of his live well, but just enough so he can get it through his lid, and he puts that on top there. You fill your live well, that keeps the surface of the water smooth. It might ruffle up at the edges, but those fish aren't getting beat around through the air and through somebody else cut pool noodles. I don't think they stay together as well, but they just lay them in there, and it helps, you know. If you can keep your live wells filled and keep that water from sloshing, that takes a huge amount of stress off the fish. So that's just, get your tournament live well parameters all lined up for the coming year. That's what wintertime's for. So anyways, any more questions?
Is it pretty obvious when you pierce the skin? You know?
Yeah, the skin is pretty tough. Really, you'll see the point, the bevel point of that needle. You can come up and look at it. It's angled. You shouldn't go any deeper in that fish. You just pierce it. If you're trying to like screw it in there, it's not going. You're stuck in a scale. A lot of times you pull that needle back out and the scale comes right out on the tip of the needle. It should not push hard. You just kind of use that tip of that needle and you kind of go back and forth underneath the scale till you get to the skin. And you just push just enough. You'll feel that needle break through the skin. Set straight up and down, boom, down.
No matter the size of the fish, all the way down?
High. I mean, if it's really small, you might want to pull back a little bit, but most of the smallmouth that come up that need fizzing, you know, if they're 3 pounds or more, I mean, you know, I like to push it in there because the swim bladder is a big balloon in there. I don't want to just touch the edge of the balloon, have the fish move, and have the needle come out. So I like to push it in. As long as there's air coming out, you know you're in the swim bladder. That's how I do it. So, anyways, hope you guys weren't too unhappy with it.
No, thank you.
Yeah,
Great
yeah,
presentation.
And I have fish kits up here if anybody wants to look at them. So.
And you have
Yep, for sale?
Oh yeah, yep. There's some here. There's some here I have that don't include language in there in the reamer, like leaving it in place. It doesn't tell you to leave it, but you know, these just keep in mind that you know you still want to fizz the fish with the reamer in place. These are just older. I have a new set of directions than the other ones, but
Are these the newer ones, Mark?
yeah, this bag is the newer ones.
So these
here.
are the older ones?
Oh no, the needles are all the same. Everything's the same. I just have a few lines left out about make sure you start.
Then the preacher said, people take a moment or two. There's something we need to do. Pray for the fish. They won't know what's coming when the sin starts rolling off the likes of him. Lord, be with them. They ain't done nothing. Please, won't you leave them just a little bit of room to swim. Pray for the fish.